All right, so I am going to get started, and if people start trickling in, I am recording this, so you all will be getting a email with this attached as well. So first and foremost, just want to thank you all for being here this morning, and thanking you for taking the time out of your day and also to volunteer your time on Thursday at the commission meeting. So I'm going to, out of respect for everybody's time, just go over a brief agenda for the webinar today. I'm going to start with just a general overview of the California Set Gillnet fishery and our campaign. And then we are going to discuss your volunteer role at the commission meeting this Thursday. I just want to preface this webinar by saying this is going to be a very general overview. There's a lot of information involved, and if you are interested in learning more about the fishery and our campaign, I will be sending over a follow-up email at the conclusion of this webinar, and I'll attach a bunch of different resources to it if you are looking for a more in-depth analysis, including a bycatch report that we co-authored with scientists from Oceania. So with that said, what is the California Set Gillnet fishery? So the California Set Gillnet fishery is a gillnet fishery that operates off the coast of Southern California. It's characterized by nearly invisible gillnets that are anchored to the sea floor, and they can actually be as long as the Golden Gate Bridge. The two target species in this fishery is actually California halibut and white sea bass. So those are the two species that fishermen are actively trying to catch. Unfortunately, they indiscriminately catch more than 125 different marine species, and we characterize this as bycatch. So in this fishery, the bycatch includes marine mammals, sharks, rays, skates, seabirds, invertebrates, and other non-target species of fish. Now, this fishery is not very large. There are very few active permits, but they do still have a significant impact on our marine biodiversity in Southern California. There are several latent permits, which I will talk about in a later slide, but that is one of our top concerns. But if you look at the figure on the right, this is the number of commercial California halibut vessels by gear type. So in Southern California, California halibut is typically caught by three different gear types: trawl, gillnet, hook, and line. And as you can see in 2019, much of the fishing effort was provided by the hook and line fishermen. Gillnets only accounted for 7%, and there were only 29 active vessels. So it really isn't a large fishing fleet. So the fishing location history and management history is pretty unique. I don't have this on the slide, but it started in 1915 when set gillnets were actually banned in Northern California. In 1990, Proposition 132 effectively banned set gillnets in Southern California state waters. So fishermen were just pushed a little bit farther off the coast. In 2002, the commission banned the use of set gillnets off the California Central Coast. And it's really important to note that after these bans were implemented, different species that were extremely vulnerable and facing population decline due to bycatch in the fisheries actually recovered and rebounded, and most notably was the harbor porpoise. So that kind of brings us into today. So presently, set gillnets are still allowed to be used offshore in Southern California waters. This typically takes place between 300 and 200 miles offshore, and they are managed under the jurisdiction of the state. So as you can see in the map on the right, everything in red is actually where set gillnets are allowed to operate and where a majority of the fishing takes place. Everything in the green is off limits. Set gillnets are banned there. And then the blue, which is just the general ocean, set gillnets are allowed to be placed there, but much of the fishing pressure is localized in the red areas. And as you can see, there's a pretty significant bubble around the Channel Islands. And this is especially one of our greatest causes of concern because the Channel Islands are a very biodiverse marine ecosystem. So we are definitely concerned about that location. So as a part of our bycatch analysis, we worked with scientists from Oceania, and we were able to do a data analysis using fishery observer data. If you're not familiar with fishery observers, they are scientists or biologists that are placed aboard commercial fishing vessels, and they are able to document and record the fishermen's catch. And they use this data and communicate with different federal agencies like NOAA and the National Marine Fisheries Services. And that way, the agencies are able to effectively manage fisheries for sustainability while also ensuring the protection of different marine species that may be protected under federal law and policy, like the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. With that said, the federal fishery observer program here in the United States is lacking a little bit. We do have a lack of observer coverage, and this definitely leads to some issues, especially regarding data gaps. And that is something that is pretty widespread across the United States, but we definitely did encounter that with the California set gillnet fishery. I believe over a 15-year period, we only had access to 7 years of data, and that's just because there were no observers on board for the other years. The most recent year that we have data for is 2017. So from 2017 to present time, we don't actually know what the status of the bycatch actually is because they haven't had a fishery observer on board. So with that said, California set gillnets actually have one of the highest discard rates by the number of animals on the West Coast. So discard rates are actually referring to when fishermen bring in their catch, if the animal or the fish or the individual species is not considered marketable or profitable, they are tossed overboard. And with that said, 2 out of every individual fish and animals caught are actually tossed overboard, and over 50% of them are dead before they even hit the water. One of the biggest gray areas with fisheries management is that we also don't really know the post-release mortality rate. So if let's say a shark survives the initial entanglement in the gill net, but is slightly injured or whatever it may be, and it's tossed overboard alive, we actually don't know what happens to that animal once it hits the water. Different species have really unique physiological responses to stress. And if they are injured, entanglements often cause open wounds, which is obviously a breeding ground for bacteria and infection and just can cause a whole world of problems. So we don't know how long the animal actually survives once it is, tossed back overboard if it was alive initially. And that is a huge problem for bycatch overall. So while we were doing our report, we were able to identify a few different species of interest. And these are species that some people could definitely identify with, they are more familiar with. Like I said, there were 125 different marine species that are caught in these gill nets, but we did pull a few out that were of greater concern. One of them was great white sharks. So obviously, great white sharks kind of get a bad rap sometimes because of Hollywood, but they are an extremely important species and they are technically considered a keystone species. And Southern California is a very popular nursery ground for sharks in general, but especially for juvenile great white sharks. And unfortunately, that is what we see as bycatch in the California set gillnet fishery. It was actually identified that the California set gillnet fishery was responsible for 90% of the catch and discard of juvenile great white sharks in the state of California as a whole. And that statistic alone is extremely alarming and very concerning for all of us. Another shark species is the taupe shark. So taupe sharks are one that you may not be too familiar with, but they go by a few different names. They're sometimes referred to as school sharks or soup fin sharks. But they are another species that is really, really of high concern and priority. Unfortunately, they are a candidate for ESA listing, which means they are considered to be approaching a really dangerous area regarding to their status. They are listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. And that is in response to multiple different contributing factors relating to anthropogenic threats as well as environmental factors. One of them is actually fishing pressure and bycatch. And we're actually seeing that obviously right here in Southern California with the taupe shark. And as for marine mammals, we have California sea lions. Now, this one is honestly really sad, and it's always kind of difficult to digest. But California sea lions are very curious creatures, and of course, whenever they kind of get sense of a fish, like a dead fish, they're going to go after it. And unfortunately, that's what happens in the set gillnet fishery. They end up getting entangled in the gill nets. As mammals, they're oxygen breathing. So unfortunately, many of them do drown. It's a very traumatic death and it's very sad. But for those who do survive, they're often surviving with horrible, horrible injuries. Gill nets can cut into their flesh. Again, it can cause infection and long-term issues down the line. So it's really a difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around. And unfortunately, the California set gillnet fishery is actually the largest contributor to California sea lion bycatch on the West Coast. Humpback and gray whales are two species of whales that are, highly migratory species. Unfortunately, these species tend to travel through the routes of the set gillnets in Southern California. There have also been multiple reports of large whale entanglements involving unidentified gillnets. Now, it's really difficult to kind of pinpoint the origin of these gillnets because there are currently no specific gear markings involved, but it's definitely something that we have to consider and keep in the back of our mind. But I will be talking about this on the next slide. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of different proposed management solutions. We have been involved in several different commission meetings and Marine Resources Committee meetings as well. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about Turtle Island's position and what we have been advocating for throughout the duration of this campaign. So obviously, one of our top priorities is we would like to see a complete phase out of this fishery. It is 2023. We're about to step into 2024, and we still have gillnets in our waters that are causing, extreme harm to our marine life and our marine biodiversity. There are alternative fishing gear methods, as we already discussed. The hook and line fishery is a very popular one for California halibut and white sea bass. So there are alternatives out there, and this is just something that obviously we feel very strongly about and we advocate for at every meeting. What we would really like to see is a timeline established and a sunset date placed for all permits. This sunset date would basically act as almost an expiration date. So the fishermen would be able to fish throughout the duration of this date, and once that effective date is approaching, then after that, no more gillnets in the water and the fishery would be closed for good. And this is arguably one of the better management solutions moving forward, just because without gillnets in the water, there is no threat of bycatch in these gillnets happening. So we do understand that it is a timely process and there's a lot of moving parts involved. But what we would also like to see are certain management measures implemented as kind of stepping stones and part of a gradual phase out process. One of those is permit management. As I previously mentioned, latent permits are of very high concern. Those are permits that are currently not active, but they have the ability to become active. And this fishery has a lot of latent permits. And that has a huge, huge impact on our marine life and this ecosystem, because once those permits are reactivated, it puts additional pressure on the ecosystem itself, but it also drives up fishing competition for the active fishermen. And with more nets in the water, a higher fishing competition, that's just going to increase bycatch rates significantly. So a way to basically make sure that does not happen is to just retire latent permits. This is the most economically feasible option for all parties involved. And we definitely have advocated for that, and we are going to continue to advocate for that. Another permit management topic is the transferability of permits. So currently permits are able to be transferred from one fisherman to another individual, and this kind of just keeps the cycle of environmental impact rolling. One thing we have advocated for is that this fishery have non-transferable permits. So when the fisherman retires, their permit retires with them. And this would just kind of stop that cycle from continuing. I will talk about soak time in a minute because it is part of the near-term package, but I'm going to talk about hard caps first. So hard caps on bycatch is a really, really great management measure to reduce bycatch in commercial fisheries. I'll talk about a little bit about an example. In Hawaii, the longline fishery was experiencing issues with leatherback sea turtle bycatch. So in response to that, they implemented hard caps on the fishery as a whole, as well as on individual fishing vessels that are members of their fishing fleet. So as a whole, if the fishery exceeded the allotted amount of individual turtles they were allowed legally to catch as bycatch, then the entire fishery would shut down for the duration of the season. It didn't matter if this happened within the first week or if it happened within the last month of the season. The entire fishery would shut down. They would no longer fish. And this model and this management measure is really an effective ecosystem-based fisheries management tool. And it actually works. And it shows that they're promoting the sustainability of vulnerable species. And we definitely have advocated for this. And this is something that we feel would really benefit our marine life here in Southern California, especially with the rate of bycatch in this fishery. So the near-term package is actually what is going to be discussed this Thursday at the commission meeting. So the Marine Resources Committee is going to be giving their official recommendation for rulemaking to the entire commission, and it includes these three management measures. Unfortunately, not all of them actually address bycatch in an effort to reduce it, but some of them do. And we obviously want to be supportive of the process, but we definitely are advocating for more robust management measures that are actually going to make a difference. So soak time is the one that's probably of highest priority. And that's simply because there is actually no maximum soak time in this fishery at all. The gillnets are allowed to be in the water at the discretion of the fishermen. So this could be for hours, for days, for weeks. It's kind of up to them. There's no current regulatory framework in place for this. And that's what is really brought this to the forefront. So the current discussions are the soak time is going to be between somewhere 24 to 48 hours. Obviously, the gillnet fishermen are advocating for 48 hours, while NGOs and other advocates are leaning more towards 24 hours. Turtle Island is going to push the envelope a little bit, and we are going to advocate for a maximum soak time of between 12 and 18 hours. And this is in part due to a discussion that was had at the previous MRC meeting just in November. The department gave a presentation, and one of the considerations for soak time was that they spoke with members of the fishing fleet, and the fishermen reported that a majority of them actually soak their gill nets for less than 24 hours anyway. So basically, we see that as anything greater than 24 hours is going to, cause significant harm to the ecosystem and drive up bycatch rates. So we are really going to advocate for something less than 24 hours. Gear marking is one that is a very useful tool, but it's not necessarily going to actually address reducing the bycatch in this fishery. So gear marking was brought up in response to those large whale entanglements that I talked about in the previous slide. This is going to be definitely a useful tool in identifying which fishery is at fault for these large whale entanglements. At this given time, we cannot really pinpoint the origin, but gear marking is definitely going to help with that. So we support it as a tool, but again, it's not necessarily a measure that's going to reduce bycatch. It's not going to stop a sea lion from getting entangled, and it's not going to stop, a crab or a barracuda. There's nothing within that measure that's going to stop it from happening. It's just going to make it easier for us to identify who is actually at fault in these instances. So the third one is mesh depth. This was actually proposed by the fishermen. It's an interesting management measure, but again, it's not necessarily going to prevent animals from becoming entangled in this fishery. The new proposed mesh depths are a maximum of 25 meters for California halibut nets and 50 meters for white sea bass nets. Again, it's just kind of changing the depth at which they can place the nets, but it's not going to technically reduce any sort of bycatch, unfortunately. Aside from those, there are future discussions about reinstating the observer program as well as a pilot program for electronic monitoring. So Turtle Island has been advocating for the reinstatement of the observer program. As I talked about previously, our most recent data set was from 2017. So all of our data technically is considered to be out of date. We have nothing up to date. So we don't really know the current status of bycatch in this fishery. And that's obviously a huge problem when looking at it from a management perspective. So we have been advocating for reinstatement of the observer program. We would like to see fishery observers back on board these vessels as soon as possible. Electronic monitoring is a very unique tool, and it can be used in conjunction with fishery observers, but it could also work independently. So I'm not too sure about the background that they are proposing for this, but traditionally electronic monitoring uses different technical softwares to monitor the catch of fishermen. It could either use voice recognition by fishermen calling out their catch, or it could use video to record them bringing in their catch, or it could use a combination of both. Obviously, technology has its flaws. We all know that, but it definitely is something that could be a useful tool in the future. So with that said, I'm going to talk a little bit about your volunteer role at the commission meeting this Thursday. So one of the biggest things that I'd like to emphasize with this is that your voice matters. I know it can be a little bit intimidating speaking in front of larger crowds, but I just want to let you guys know, you have a place in that room and you have a seat at that table. These meetings are open to the public. Anybody can attend them and anybody can advocate for whatever they feel strongly about. And that's what we just want to encourage you all to do. The commission has heard from us time and time again. They know how we feel and they know what we stand for and what we are advocating for. They also know what the Gillnetters are advocating for and what they want to see. But what they haven't really heard from yet is members of the community like all of you. And that's something that, we really want to bring forward this week and at future meetings as well. We would love to amplify your voices and have you advocate for our oceans and our marine life, because in the end, they can't really speak for themselves. So that's what we are here to do. So with that said, the meeting is this Thursday, December 14th. It starts at 8 a.m. Pacific time. You can attend either on Zoom or in person in San Diego. If you are planning on attending in person, just reach out to me and let me know, and I can connect you with some of our colleagues in our coalition who will be there in person. That way you won't be by yourself and you can kind of join their bubble and see how things go. But again, it starts at 8 a.m. Pacific. We are agenda item number 22, so I cannot give any definitive time frame about when we will actually be going on. It's kind of difficult to gauge. They're different every time, these meetings. Sometimes we go on around lunch, sometimes after or before. It's really hard to determine, especially with previous agenda items. But what we traditionally do is I will just send out an email to everybody once we hit agenda item number 21. That way you are able to kind of get prepared and get yourself all oriented and logged on to Zoom and just get ready to give your public comment. And how these meetings usually work is they will give a presentation about what is on the agenda for the day. As I talked about previously, it is going to focus on that near-term package. So they're going to give a presentation about that, and then they're going to open the floor to public comment. And during that time, if you are on Zoom, you're going to use the little raise hand feature, and then that's all you really have to do. You just keep it raised, and they will mark down everybody on Zoom who wants to speak. They usually will start with the people in person. So you'll get to hear all of their comments and hear from a lot of different voices. And then they will move on to Zoom. And then, like I said, they make this process pretty simple. Once they call your name, you just take yourself off mute and then you say your comment, and that's about it. And they thank you and move on to the next person. So it's actually a pretty simple process. And I know this is a lot of information and you guys are kind of jumping into this relatively new. So just to take the pressure off, I can write your comments for you. You can read them verbatim if you'd like, or you can personalize them however you want. We just want to make sure we get as many voices possible in this room. We all are trying to advocate for the same thing, and we want to make sure that they hear that, but just in different ways. Because in previous meetings, they have definitely hated hearing repetitive comments. They think it takes too much time. So we really want to make them unique and make them different. And just to take the pressure off all of you, I will write your comments for you. So if you end up not being able to attend the meeting, just reach out to me and let me know. That's totally okay. But this campaign is definitely going to be a major priority for Turtle Island in 2024. We are putting this at the forefront of our advocacy. It's definitely an important issue, and we are going to continue to fight for it throughout the duration of the year. And with that said, there will be future volunteer opportunities available as well. We would love to have all of you on as a part of our volunteer coalition, and I would love to send you guys updates as we move through the year. This is obviously a very dynamic campaign. Things are always changing. So opportunities may arise to speak at future meetings, different like MRC meetings or even the commission meetings again. There'll just be a lot of opportunities available. So we would love to have you guys aboard for that as well. So with that said, again, I just want to thank you all for being here today and also for volunteering your time on Thursday. Going to be really awesome to hear from all of you, hear you all become really great ocean advocates and stand up for what you believe in and fight for our marine life. But yeah, I know there's some people in here from Turtle Island as well. So if any of you want to say anything, or if I forgot anything, or if there's something super important, you can just hop off mute. Or if there's any questions as well, I can try to answer them to the best of my ability. So.
Hi, could you just tell us, so should we say our name? I'm blah, blah, I live so and so, or I know you said you'd actually write out the comments, but just a general, do you introduce yourself? Do you say where you live?
Yeah, so generally, what we usually would say in the past is you would just kind of introduce yourself. You say your name. I'll just give like a brief example. So I would say, "Hi, my name's Elizabeth, and I'm a passionate ocean lover or I'm a diver or whatever it may be. I'm really concerned about the bycatch in the California set gillnet fishery, and I would really want to encourage the commission to consider completely closing this fishery for the sake of our marine life. And then you just thank them for their time, and that's about it. It's a pretty simple process, but we want to keep it as short as sweet and possible so we don't overload them too much because they tend to get a little bit snippy if comments are extremely long and they like to keep the process moving. So one of the Todds, go ahead, whoever has their hand raised. Yep, you can go ahead, Todd.
Hi, how you doing today? Thank you very much for the invitation for all this. My name is Todd Kennedy, and I'm a previous resident of California, but now I'm back east. I'm in the South now, but I'm still keeping up to speed of what's going on, out there on the West Coast. Um, I think my question is that even though I'm away, and I know you gave the Zoom option and all that, but it's okay. You said it's okay for me to submit my comments to you by email. Is that okay?
Yeah, are you able to speak in person at the meeting, like remotely via Zoom?
Perhaps
Okay.
because it might be during a work schedule and all that. Plus, I'll be leaving early because you're 3 hours behind me, and so I might be leaving early that day, and so I might have a conflict. So if I do it, like, is it okay to submit something to you by email?
Yeah, so what will happen is if you're unable to, that's totally okay. There will be future opportunities in the new year to speak at additional meetings.
Okay.
We already passed the time to submit written comments, but in the new year, we will definitely be able to take written comments as well. But yeah, if you are unable to attend, no worries. I will just keep you on deck and in the email loop, and we can discuss further in the new year at the new meeting. But yeah, that's
Okay.
totally cool. I'm also on the East Coast, so I totally understand.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Are there any other questions or anything? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you all again for being here. If anything comes up or you do have additional questions, feel free to reach out to me via email. If not, if I don't hear from you, I will just assume that you are planning on speaking. So I will go ahead and send you guys over draft comments probably by tomorrow morning. That way you have them already. But again, if you have any other questions up until then, you can always reach me by email. I'm pretty quick at responding. So yeah, but thank you again for being here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you on Thursday.